Armageddon is perhaps the most recognizable concept in the book of Revelation. The word Antichrist doesn't appear in the book of Revelation. There's all sorts of amazing destructions and scary sorts of things in this final book of the Bible, but perhaps nothing draws as much attention as the concept, the spectacle, the fear of something called Armageddon. And it appears in Revelation chapter 16. And like everything else in this highly symbolic, apocalyptic book of ancient Jewish writing, Armageddon must be read in its context. It has to be contextualized for us to understand what it's really speaking about. Even in today, Armageddon is something that is a popular cultural trope. Peter Thiel, a popular technologist, venture capitalist, talks a lot about Armageddon and the Antichrist. And we're going to talk about that today. Peter Thiel's view of this, where it does and doesn't overlap with what the Bible is actually teaching in Revelation chapter 16. But as is usually our method here on the Deeper Bible podcast, we're not going to just jump straight to the sort of the headline thing. We're actually going to do the work to understand this passage bit by bit and see how Armageddon fits into what is being said in that more well-rounded view. So last time we got together, we were in Revelation 15, which was a view into like the heavenly temple. There's this idea, there's this parallel dimension. The earthly dimension is where we live. Heaven is God's dimension, and there's an intercourse between them. There's linkage. And in chapter 15, we were in the heavenly temple, and there was praises and so forth. And chapter 16 begins right there. So I'll just take us bit by bit and try to unpack this. And we're verse 16, just so you know, verse 16 is where we read about Armageddon. And there's some fascinating stuff there. You won't want to miss that. So it goes like this. Then I heard a loud voice coming from the temple. It's the heavenly temple. Continues on from chapter 15. Addressing the seven angels. Off you go, said the voice, and pour out on the earth the seven bowls of God's anger. Now, just as a refresher, several times in Revelation, we've seen what seems to be a very angry, wrathful God. How do we deal with that? What does that mean? Richard Niebuhr, Reinhold, his brother, famously said that the Christianity we want, the gospel we want, is a God without wrath who saves men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. It's sort of stripped of all that sort of wrath business. But in Revelation, we're challenged to see a deeper dimension of what God's wrath really means. According to chapter 11, verse 18, it means when God destroys the destroyers of the earth. So all those forces, those interests, those personalities that collude with the defacing of God's good world, with warping it, with poisoning it, God, who is loyal to his creation, is determined to destroy the destroyers of the earth. And God's wrath works in a couple different ways. There's like a passive wrath where God just says like, okay, fine, have it your way, and allows evil to fold in on itself, to corrupt and to destroy itself from within. That's a passive wrath. There's also an active wrath where God actively intervenes, says, okay, I'm stopping this. And we see some of both in the book of Revelation. For example, right here, chapter 16, these first four bowls of God's wrath, highly symbolic language, show like the elements of the natural world that are being allowed to damage humans. Humans, according to Revelation, have kind of like lost the plot. We've forgotten our role in the created order to be wise stewards and image bearers of God. And so what happens here is God allows like the waters and the sun to damage humans because humans have damaged the creation. So it's important to see wrath doesn't just mean what we might fear that it means, a sort of a temper tantrum, out of control, angry, vengeful God. No, it's actually a far more principled, controlled. There's a logic behind it. We need to see that. So these seven angels, they have bowls of God's wrath. So the first one went off and poured out his bowl on the earth. Foul, painful sores came on the people who had the mark of the monster and on those who worshipped its image. Remember, in Revelation, everyone has a mark. It shows your loyalty, your value system. And these sores, they had sores. That points to one of the stories constantly in the background of the book of Revelation, which is the Exodus story, the story of God freeing the Israelite slaves from oppression in Egypt. And there's this sequence of 10 plagues. Sores are one of them, and that's going to pop up again and again. The second angel poured his bowl on the sea, and it turned into blood, like that from a corpse. Remember also back in Exodus, turning water to blood is one of the things Moses did. Every living thing in the sea died. So whereas earlier on in the seven trumpets, that cycle, and in the earlier seals, there were like partial destructions. Things are ramping up here as now in chapter 16, and now every living thing is dying. And we have to remember, again, we can't say this enough, this is symbolic literature. It is not to be read as sort of like a chronological forecasting of first this, then this, then this. The technical term for this type of literature is more, it is aspectival. It is giving different angles of vision on one single reality. So a common mistake in reading the book of Revelation is try to, connect the dots between each one of these vivid images and then whatever happened in history or what's going on in the current newspaper or what the prognosticators say is going to happen tomorrow or next month or whatever. That's an incorrect way to read this literature. It's just simply not how it works as a piece of ancient Jewish writing. And it's enormously powerful, but its power is not of that sort of like narrow predictive sort. So the third one then poured out his bowl on the rivers and the springs of water. They turned into blood. Then I heard the angel of the waters saying, "You are the one who is and who was. You are the Holy One. You are just. You have passed the righteous sentence. They, the evil forces in the world, they spilt the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. They deserve it." It's almost a sort of a karmic logic, or as we'll see in a couple episodes on, when Babylon is judged, Babylon accused all the saints of Jesus, and so Babylon in its turn will be accused. And this goes back to a very ancient law in the book of Deuteronomy, where a false witness, if you lie about somebody in a court of law and you're found to be lying, then the punishment that would have been on the person that you accused now comes on you. There's a sort of an even-handed justice. And so interestingly, I heard the altar respond. This is the next verse, verse 7. I heard the altar is speaking, this kind of inanimate structure that has, whose function is the place of blood. I heard the altar respond, "Yes, Lord God Almighty, your judgments are true and just." Then the fourth angel poured his bowl upon the sun, and it was allowed to burn people with fire. People were burned up by its great heat, and they cursed the name of the God who had authority over these plagues. Here's the key line. They did not repent or give him glory. So throughout the book, throughout the Bible, one of the main purposes of God's judgment is to give people a chance, to wake them up and to say, hey, you do realize that the system to which you've pledged loyalty is destructive and it's going to suck you down with it. I want to give you a chance to get off that sinking ship. But by this point, people are like, no, we're going down with the ship. So there's these first four, and I might circle back to this at the end, but it's worth saying here, this is not signaling like the end of the space-time universe, like the physical cosmos is erupting. This literature works in a way that often uses those sort of natural symbols to communicate the erosion, the destruction of what we would call social and political realities. The order of the world, of the human world, is falling apart. But it's incorrect to sort of say, well, I'm waiting for the sun, the physical star up in the sky, to go bonkers, and then I will know that this is happening. Again, that's not how this literature works as a cultural code. So let's keep going. We're getting closer to Armageddon. So the fifth angel poured out his bowl upon the throne of the monster, sort of like the heart of the imperial system. If you remember from earlier episodes, very often what John has in view when he's talking about evil is the Roman Empire and its interconnected system of military and financial and idolatrous power. But it's not just a sheerly political argument that he's making to say sort of like down with the government. He's looking even deeper than that to a sort of dark, sinister, satanic force that operates behind that imperial system. And so we're going to see here in a minute, there's sort of an unholy trinity. There's a false prophet. There's the monster, which we're seeing here, which symbolizes the Roman Empire. But then there's a dragon. There's a deeper, darker force even behind that. So, okay. Fifth angel pours his bowl upon the throne of the monster. Its kingdom is plunged into darkness. That's another Exodus plague. And the Exodus logic is at work here. Why did God smite Egypt? Just for fun? Just to show who's boss? No. The deeper logic is strike the oppressor so the oppressed can go free. God is doing this so that the people of Israel will no longer be enslaved and can go free. And just so, the bowl of wrath on the throne of the monster, the darkness and all that, it's for the purpose so that God's people can be liberated and the whole earth can be liberated. People chewed their tongues because of the pain, it's a vivid image, and cursed the God of heaven because of their agonies and the terrible source. And again, here it is. They did not repent of what they had been doing. So that's the theme. Then the sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up in order to prepare the way for the kings from the rising sun. Now, this is interesting because it's Exodus imagery of water dried up. Remember, the Red Sea gets dried up. They go through. The Jordan River gets dried up. They go through. Here, the Euphrates is dried up. And yet it's not so that the people of Israel can go through. It's so that the kings of the East can come for battle. And in that part of the world in antiquity, the Euphrates River was a major natural boundary, geographic boundary in this era between the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire further to the east. And it was often feared among the Romans that, those kings of the east, which Alexander the Great had conquered in his several centuries prior, that they're going to come with a great army. They're going to destroy us. Many Roman generals had tried to conquer those lands and had failed. And so here he's drawing on sort of common first century pop culture fears. The kings of the east are going to come. Our social order is going to be destroyed. Next, then I saw 3 unclean spirits coming up out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the monster, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So these 3 are in cahoots. This is, I mentioned a moment ago, this is like the unholy trinity, the dragon, the ultimate source of evil, the monster, which seems to be sort of the imperial system, if you want to use that word, although I don't love that word, the false prophet. That's the sort of the spokesman, the propaganda arm, whatever you want to say. And they were like, this is very interesting. They're like frogs, they're like frog demons. That's again, this is symbolic language. Some commentators talk about how, let me read the next verse and then I'll talk about the frogs. These are the spirits of demons who perform signs and go off to the kings of the whole earth to gather them together for war on the great day of God Almighty. And I was reading one commentator who was talking about how sort of like, how frogs kind of jump here and there and they're kind of shifty, and that's kind of almost like public opinion, or like, just kind of shifty arguments that attract a lot of attention and but can ultimately, lead to incorrect conclusions, something like that. Now, this next verse, we're 2 verses away from Armageddon. This next verse is very interesting because it's an interjection from Jesus. Like we're just in this sequence of just symbolic chaos. And then we get this. This is verse 15. Look, I am coming like a thief. God's blessing on the one who stays awake and on those who keep their robes about them so as not to go around naked and have their shame exposed. This is very interesting. It's like an interjection to say, hey, are you falling asleep? Don't fall asleep. Are you nodding off? Spiritually, maybe? It's very easy to read something like this. You're 16 chapters in and your eyes are just kind of glazing over, and maybe, glazing over too, because you're like, well, thank God none of this is going to happen to me. Thank God it's going to happen to all of them, but I'm safe and I'm just going to sit back and watch the movie here. And the word of warning comes in and says, no. You need to stay alert. The deceit, the deceit that has been let loose in the world is extremely dangerous. It's very easy to mistake it for the truth. Are you awake? And it's a very interesting and timely interjection right before this very famous verse 16. And they, the frog demons, gathered the kings together at the place which in Hebrew is called, and my translation says, Mount Megiddo, Armageddon. So let me talk about this, unpack this a little bit. I'm using the translation, the New Testament for Everyone, and it translates it as Mount Megiddo, and that's actually accurate because Armageddon is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Har Megiddo. Har in Hebrew means mountain. And Megiddo is the name of a city in northern Israel. I'll tell you about that in just a second. In the Greek text, the way you read that word is Har Megiddon. And Har is straight over translation from the Hebrew word mountain. Now, what's puzzling is Megiddo, that city, is not on a mountain. It's actually in a massive valley. So in northern Israel, today, as in ancient times, there is to the west of the Sea of Galilee, kind of southwest, a large valley that it's called the Jezreel Valley, and it's been a very important valley in history for a number of reasons. First, it's been an agricultural breadbasket, so lots and lots of food has come out of there, so it's desirable for that. Also, it has hosted international thoroughfares in ancient times. The major road connecting Egyptian markets with the Mesopotamian markets went right through there. And Megiddo is, you can go there today. It's what's called a tell, which is it's like a history mound, because this large mound, and it's like 100 feet high, when you cut a trench in it, which archaeologists have done, it exposes sequential occupational layers from different times in history. When the city was destroyed, because of the natural advantages of there's good water, there's good roads and stuff, they said, we'll just rebuild right atop the ruins. And they did this and did this and did this. And there's some 20 occupational layers there at Megiddo. And in ancient Israelite history in the Old Testament, it comes up several times in the books of Judges and the books of Kings. Lots of major battles happen there. During Solomon's reign, he kind of beefs up this city, makes it a big administrative center. King Ahab does the same. Very famous King Josiah is killed in a battle right there in the Jezreel Valley. He's battling the Egyptian pharaoh Necho, and he kind of limps over and dies in Megiddo. So what is the symbolic place of Megiddo in the ancient Israelite imagination? This whole area is kind of symbolizes the place where the armies of the world come to attack the people of God. There's several battles, like check Judges 4 and 5. You could Google this. Megiddo comes up many times in the Old Testament, and yet the way it appears here in Revelation is something of a riddle, because as I said, it's actually not a mountain. There are mountains behind it, but it's actually in a valley. And that points to, again, John is writing in symbolic language. And so it'd be very strange for him, this writer who's a genius with symbols, suddenly here when he talks about Megiddo, to suddenly like double down on historical literalness. It doesn't seem to be what he's saying. Rather, what he seems to be saying is what's been said throughout Revelation, that in the way God deals with evil, he brings it to one point and exposes it in all of its ugliness so as to deal with it. And that's what Christians believe about the cross, that on the cross, all the ugliness and rebellion and woundedness and grossness and evil of the world was concentrated in one spot in the body of Jesus. And God there dealt with it in a final way. Let me talk for just a second about Armageddon in popular culture. I mentioned at the beginning Peter Thiel, and he's a very interesting fellow. He's used to be based here in San Francisco, went to Stanford, venture capitalist, technologist, like J.D. Vance, when he was a law school student, looked up Peter Thiel, found him interesting, and went and worked for him for several years. He's been kind of a central figure in the resurgence of interest in faith among people in Silicon Valley. Anyways, look him up. He's not a biblical scholar, but for him, let me just try to lay out kind of his view, so far as I understand it. There's kind of these two opposing dangers facing the world right now, and he calls one Armageddon. He calls the other the Antichrist. Armageddon represents annihilation. The Antichrist represents authoritarianism. And people talk about Armageddon type scenarios all the time. We're talking about, if the AI goes rogue, if we have nuclear war, if the China-Taiwan thing blows up, if the climate disaster, this sort of like scenarios, the end of the world. My wife and I right now are listening to just in the evenings, we're listening to Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, and it's a great novel. And in the background, it's far more sophisticated than the movie, and the movie's awesome. Is this whole idea of genetic engineering goes haywire, and humans have messed with things beyond their control, and therefore will be wiped out. It is a bit of an Armageddon sort of scenario. And here's Peter Thiel's point, is to say it's not taboo to talk about this. Everybody talks about this. However, what is taboo to talk about is the idea of an antichrist. And by that, he means sort of an authoritarian regime that will come to power in the name of, we need safety, we need control, we need governmental regulation of all this stuff. So it's the idea of a one world government that pitches itself as the solution to Armageddon. So here's a quote from Peter Thiel. He says, "The Antichrist will talk about Armageddon all the time. He'll scare people, then offer to save them." And, for him, so there's kind of a narrow path between Armageddon, annihilation, humans destroying ourselves in a profound way, and then, on the other hand, a sort of like atheist police state that is, worldwide and controls all the major aspects of society, which would be its own sort of disaster. Peter Thiel, I don't know a ton about the guy. I mean, probably about as much as you. He's not a Bible scholar, but he is a Christian, and he does, he is somebody who I'd say fears God, or is aware that humans are not ultimately in control of history. I think he's right to be thinking about these questions in terms not just of personalities, like who is it, that president, is it that UN general secretary, is it that? He's open to entertain that, but I think he's thinking, and correctly so, at broader levels of like extremely complex interlocking systems of control and things that would dehumanize us. And so I agree there. Where I disagree is from what I've heard, it seems to be very anthropocentric. That is to say, the main concern is what will happen to humankind. Will we survive? Will we be miserable? And I think that anthropocentrism actually misses the bigger plot line of the Bible, which is a theocentrism, which is a concern for all of creation, not just human creation. And so while he talks in terms of, these big, large, massive economic and technological systems, all of which are real and should be considered, I actually think it's a little too small, because it is anthropocentric as opposed to theocentric. But anyways, I do find it interesting. And I do think, though, we often focus on verse 16 and ignore verse 15. Verse 15, stay awake, keep your clothes on. Don't inadvertently collude with systems that are doomed for the judgment of God. So anyways, what's interesting about Peter Thiel is that here's a guy who's, secular educated, secular, where he's made his name and mark in the world, and yet he's talking in unabashed ways about biblical truth and thinking through how does what the Bible talks about shine light on some of the dangers in our time. But I do think that it's very easy to focus on these big scary ideas like Armageddon in chapter 16, verse 16, and miss everything that goes before, everything that comes after. And so we end up with a very lopsided picture of what the Bible is trying to tell us. Let's wrap up. We've got just a few more verses. So that was the sixth. Now here's the seventh. The seventh angel poured his bowl on the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple. We're still in the temple. This is a temple-centric vision. Loud voice came out of the temple from the throne. "It is done," said the voice. And then this next verse, we've seen this a few other times in Revelation. This verse, these elements signal the closure of a cycle of destruction. There were lightnings and rumblings and thunderclaps and a great earthquake, such as there had never been before. No, not such a great earthquake since the time that humans came on the earth. And we saw that in chapter 8, verse 5, chapter 11, verse 19. The great city was split into three parts. In Zechariah 12, we get the image of Jerusalem being split in two by a great earthquake. Here, the great city seems to be Rome. And in fact, these last few verses of chapter 16 are pointing beyond to chapter 17 and chapter 18, where God's justice will come on the city of Rome. There was a profound economic critique. Babylon is called a whore or a harlot, and we'll pick that up next time. These last few verses are pointing in that direction. So then this great city was split into three parts. The cities of the nations collapsed like Jericho or something. Then Babylon the Great was recalled in the presence of God so that he could give her the cup of the wine of his anger. Every island fled away and the mountains disappeared. Enormous hailstones, more Exodus plagues, enormous hailstones, each weighing 100 pounds, fell from the sky on people. They cursed God because of the plague of the hail, because its plague was terrible. So it's like, what is happening here? It's like that the deception at the core of idolatrous systems, that lie is being exposed and allowed to crack through everything. And in the next chapter, we're going to shift towards the end of the book. It's really a tale of two cities and a tale of two women who represent those two cities. There's Babylon, who's depicted as a whore, and there's the New Jerusalem, the ideal city, who's pictured as the bride. And next time we'll go much deeper into why that image, what does it mean, how do we make sense? So we will talk about that next time. But I guess the thought I would leave for you this time is, number one, always read the Bible in context. Number two, you can have faith knowing that God is going to ultimately deal with evil. We each need to do our little bit, but I don't, you don't, none of us can control the direction of world systems, but we can do our little bit. And according to the book of Revelation, that means being faithful, courageous witnesses to Jesus, even if that means suffering, even if that means social exclusion or people, canceling you or whatever, faithfulness. And it also means to stay awake, to keep a watch on yourself, to assess where your loyalties lie. What is implied in the sort of life decisions that you're making? And is that in alignment with the value system of the kingdom of God or the value system of other regimes that promise you the world, but like all idols, actually end up profoundly disappointing and destroying us? So something to think about. Hope this has been helpful. Hit me up sometime if you got any specific questions. Would love to correspond with you. Ryan@thebay.church. We also have a website, thedeeperbiblepodcast.com. You can learn all about that. So hope you're well and look forward to talking next time. Take care. Bye-bye.